Welcome to the Reality Revolution. I'm your host, Brian Scott. I'm speaking just after we had posted the most recent Walter and Lao Russell episode. And I was so excited to see that we had a lot of views on that particular video because there's so much Walter Russell material out there. And if you guys like it, I can read so much amazing stuff. As we know and what we've understood from our past readings, Walter Russell and Lao Russell were touched by the spirit and definitely were in contact and had an understanding of the greater forces of the universe. He wrote about it, he painted about it, and through creation, both Lao and Walter Russell became amazing teachers. Whenever you see someone like a Walter Russell or Lao Russell, and you see they were so wise, they're amazing writers, the thing to remember is that you can also experience their awakening. And that's because you're quantumly entangled. We are quantumly entangled to everything. And by reading the stories and perspectives written by Walter Russell, you become quantumly entangled to his own awakening, and it can illumine you as well. And so this particular portion of the home study course is one of my favorites because it's an essay written by Walter Russell called The Story of My Illumining, and then an essay written by Lao Russell called The Story of My God Awareness. And in each, we get a personal account of their awakening. And at the end of this, they go through what the effects of these awakenings can be when you awaken to the cosmic consciousness and the love cycle. And then at the end, there are these amazing channelings that are coming from another source. If you remember or got a chance to listen to The Secret of Light, Walter Russell had a work called The Divine Iliad, where he was essentially channeling God, very much like the impersonal life, if you had a chance to listen to that. And so this altogether is just a miraculous feast of spiritual knowledge. And when you become entangled with Walter Russell's awakening, it will definitely change you, because he had a very specific sort of awakening and way of explaining it and teaching it that no one else had. The Story of My Illumining by Walter Russell. And now the time has come when I shall try to tell you of the greatest thing that can happen to any man in all the world, as it happened to me and as it also happened to Lao, which she will tell in her own words. The illumination into the God light of cosmic consciousness, the ultimate goal of all unfolding mankind, to come at the end of an aeons-long road which began in the dark of sensing alone and ends in the glory of the light of all-knowing in God's kingdom of the high heavens, where soul of man and God are one. The first great inkling of the grandeur to come was in May of 1878, when I was 7. I had strange premonitions of it for months, perhaps even for a year, but the glory of it when it did happen was less mystifying and more understandable than the premonitions which always left me deeply wondering. Even as a boy, I had been doing extraordinary things which caused much wonder. Before I could walk, I could play on the piano with one finger all things heard by me, then all fingers gradually even to the complex melodies played by blind Mr. Maynard, who came into my life when I was 3, and who to me was the greatest man in all the world. Mr. Maynard lived in the dark, but walked and talked with God in the light. And what the soul of creation told to his soul, he told to me during all my boyhood, and I walked and talked with God in those early days in his wonderlands of Peat Meadow and the huge oaks down in Bachelor Wilds, where nobody went but me, for no one else in all my world heard what I heard there, nor saw what I saw there. So it was mine alone. All that glory was mine alone. Then it happened. A blind glare, red, then incandescent. Then a field of blue shut the whole world of all things out from me, leaving naught but indescribable ecstasy, while my body wandered by itself without me to the great root of my beloved oak, where I found myself sitting with a handful of marbles with which I had been playing with other boys in a ring full of marbles drawn in the dirt near the grocery store. I remember as though it was but a minute ago, the effect of that tremendous transition into another world, so utterly unlike that one in which my body dwelled and breathed in and out, and so strangely and unnecessarily. When I began to realize the world of many things, I felt myself to be that world of many things, all one. And I, the universe, the tree, the sky, the little ant on my thumb, and the great oak above me. An indescribable ecstasy pervaded me, like unborn vibrations of the great silence from which the vibration of sound rhythms will be born. An ecstasy which I was to know again and again for 10,000 times 10,000 times when I walked and talked with God in my world all through my long, long life of working knowingly with Him from that very day. This state of ecstasy is referred to in the Bible as being in the Spirit or in the light. In Hindu philosophy, it is referred to as the Brahmic bliss, and Muhammad called it paradise. I know not how long I sat there, but do remember saying, when asked where I had so long tarried, I have been in my world, and to this day I have always talked and written about the glorious happenings in my world. Most assuredly, I was another person, quite transformed, quite unable to be the same, think the same, or play again the same with other boys. I soon learned that my world had no meaning for them, so I stopped talking about my world to anybody but my blind friend who really did know my world. Little boys like me seemed little boys so very much unlike me that I needed them no more. I would rather hold mighty converse with the men at the car barn or play the music of my world simply to my blind maestro and hear him play it back to me glorified while my very soul was alone, I, in my world, and my body afar, always afar. My blind maestro was the only friend of my early days who dwelt with me in my world, and I in his, for he had his own world in a forest by the sea in northern Maine, where he often took me and where we would commune with nature by being alone. Many long years passed before Lao, another illuminate, came to take aloneness away from me by dwelling and working with me in my world. 7 years passed, and each year, always in May, the doors of the light which opened into my world gave me those few days of more illumining, more knowledge of the rhythms of God's thinking, more unfolding of inner sensory perception of the invisible and inaudible, which registered in my soul and tried to find birth in sounds and colors and forms through me. I played Chopin, Mozart, Handel, Laibach, and Beethoven in ecstasy, for these Illuminati dwelt with me in my world day by day. It concerned me not one whit that their bodies had passed on, for they lived in me, and souls do not die. I had long since been taken out of school and put to work. God would not let me read books. He became my teacher and closed the books which I would open. Things said in them were so unlike the nature of things in my world that he guarded me against their intrusion to blur the clarity of things I visioned in the light. He made my education to be one of increasing inner sensory perception instead of the outer sensory perception of man's educational concepts. I found that whatever I wished to know, I could know by just desiring to know in my heart. If I wished to know music, it came to me in overwhelming fullness. Musical composition and improvisation flowed from my soul as water flows from a spring. I spent glorious hours in the forest listening to celestial rhythms, which sprang into being from forest silences and fed my soul with colors of nature, turned inside out for me to see their source with inner eyes, the outer ones being too dimmed with tears for seeing. Then in my 14th year came the second great illumining, at a time when my body had been declared dead by the doctors, and undertakers were arriving. Black diphtheria had seemingly destroyed my throat and shut off my breathing. Then again came the great light which had come to me in my first illumining, and I arose from my bed, to the great amazement of my weeping parents, and to the doctors who found that my throat functioned as properly as though it were perfectly healed. During the period of complete unawareness of my body and cessation of my heartbeat, I had complete consciousness of knowing from the moment of that severance of electric sensation and conscious awareness, which I will describe later from a scientific basis. From that moment, I fully knew what God had a purpose for my living, to manifest Him by a life of demonstrating the power of man who knew God in him and worked knowingly with Him. This I fully knew, but I did not know of the transformation of unfolding man into his next cosmic age until the seventh full illumining of 1921, when my years were 7 times 7. Up to this time, my cosmic severances were 43. No words of mine can quite convey as much meaning as those set down in the divine Iliad itself, in reference to this event which God caused to take place in order that I should fulfill His purpose by conveying His message to man, for which I then knew that I was being prepared. These are the words as written in the divine Iliad in 1921. It had been given me to know that regeneration of the body from that which man calls death is within the range of power of inner thinking, if the soul has not left the body, meaning that the soul no longer controls the body through a centering consciousness. That disease which man calls black diphtheria or black plague, I had so disintegrated my body that my soul made ready for its departure, and I was pronounced dead by man. God took me up onto a high mountain where inspired man is God-man, and there gave unto me higher knowledge of the power of regeneration of my body through His all-knowing light. Through the red-violet world and the red-red world to the world of pure white light, beyond the world of blue, and back again to the world of pure white simulated light. Beyond the yellow world, the spirit within me journeyed in an ecstasy for which there are no words of man to tell. In the ecstatic state of inner knowing, the great truth of creating and decreating things was made known to me. That majestic swing of the cosmic pendulum spelled out for me the glorious rhythms of things to be, then not to be. The mystery of soul was mine, the souls of all creating things. The memory of 10 times 10,000 lives mirrored themselves in light from their records on my soul to tell me that my body was still new, that my time of disappearance had not yet come. It was then given me to know that the power of revitalization of my body was mine, and I, who had been pronounced dead by man, lived strongly in the body. I then dimly knew that there were 2 opposite chemical reactions which controlled the generation of life and the degeneration of death. These were instantly reversible in the human body by the will of man, and reversal of one voids the other completely. A simple example of the normal action of this principle is the inbreathing of oxygen, which multiplies life, and its reversal to death, giving carbon dioxide when one breathes out. This fact, which was amplified in my 1921 illumination, explained the instantaneous healings by Jesus and the 2 recorded by Mary Baker Eddy. This fact lifts such instantaneous healing out of the realm of the miraculous and gives perfect understanding of them as a process of nature which must obey the will of the one mind of the universe, which created both opposite effects as a part of nature's cyclic principle of creation. The reason it seems to be miraculous is because this reversal principle is not yet known to science. Each year, in May, year after year, came those 10 or more days when I sought the forest to be alone with God. Each year I became slightly more aware of my purpose, which I was to know fully in 1921. Each year my inner sensory perception made it possible for me to see, with inner vision, the electric workings of the universe in the construction of matter, which no man of outer perceiving could ever see or know. It was enough for the time that I was made aware of the fact that I must demonstrate tremendous versatility to prove to man that whatever he desired to do, he could do. And so the years of preparation passed, each one, however, evidenced by doing something that I had never done before, or even thought of doing, because of my ever-increasing powers of inner seeing, and each 7th year was marked by the doing of something extraordinary different from what I had ever done before, such as painting the Might of the Ages at 28, the designing and building of many buildings costing millions during the following 7 years while painting the most beautiful children in America, then introducing figure skating in America and acquiring personal masterliness of the art in addition to painting many portraits and writing many books. So complete was my inner sensory perception that I was as much aware of Lao's birth as I am aware of the coming birth of another planet in this solar system. I know that it will seem incredible and unbelievable, but I was so aware of her growth and purpose that I felt certain that she would come to fulfill our mutual destiny before the day given to me as May 19th, 1946 arrived, which was to begin our mutual activity in reversing the thinking of the human race from its greed and fear basis to the love basis of nature. During all these years of my continuous awareness of her presence, we had many telepathic communions together in which her wisdom guided me then as it does today. There was not a moment of this time in which I did not feel that she was the other half of the message to man which was commanded of me to give, and this belief was fully demonstrated by the actual fact that not one scientific disclosure or written word ever given before her coming bore fruition until after the day she came. From that day on, everything which we have jointly given to the world has borne deep fruit. Lao was as fully aware of our mutual destiny as I was. She knew also that she would seek me and that she would be guided to me when the day came. I was not surprised, therefore, when she came in March of 1946, 2 months before the destined date. So simple was this meeting that it seemed like the meeting of two who had always been together. She telephoned to me from a far city to tell me that she was here. I recognized her voice and her presence, and immediately took a plane to that far city. The story is incredible only to those whose limitations are outer sensing. To anyone whose inner sensory perception was unfolded to the great spectrum range which is given to all illuminates, this story is perfectly comprehensible and natural. I look forward to the day when I may find time to write this cosmic romance to inspire others to deeper comprehension of the multiplication of power which results from male-female unity and equality. And so the years of intensive preparations passed until May in the year of 1921, when the supreme experience of the anointing of light became mine, and my world of light and the ecstasy of it was once more mine in all of its fullness. This consummate event was prefaced by an intense premonition of something strange in the world, such as I had before known after its happening, but not before. A certain ominous and mysterious something in the very light of the sun and in the air compelled me to seek the privacy of my own chamber to await that which might be coming, for the time was here. I afterwards found that magnetic sunspot storms tore man's cables from their beds and disrupted the telephone and power systems of the nation during the middle of May. While that intense severance of consciousness from body again took place and made me just a soul and a mind again, hardly aware of my body, and made my body dependent entirely upon instinct, entirely controlled by instinct as it once was 1,000,000 years ago. The great light of my first and seventh illumining again came, and again I found my universality in that ecstasy which is the only emotion of the God nature. That ecstasy is the one unchanging and constant mind state which inspired man always feels in variable intensity as measured by the intensity of his inspiration. Owing to man's lack of knowledge of God's electric universe and man's relationship to it, no man of past ages has ever been able to give a satisfactory explanation of that instantaneous flash of red-orange light which completely blinded me for an undeterminable interval, which was followed by a feeling of being bathed in a great sea of blue. The explanation of that light flash, which Paul and other cosmic conscious men have experienced, is that there is an electric short circuit between the two lobes of the brain which causes a flash of light at the instant of severance of consciousness from the electric sensation of the body. Such a flash occurs at the moment of death in all cases and has been photographed many times. The light of spiritual consciousness centers the divided or polarized light, which constitutes the electric awareness of sensation in a body. Normally there is a complete synchronization of consciousness and sensation. But when the severance takes place, which makes the body seem like an unattached and remote appendage, and the mind alone to be all that is, the synchronization is interrupted and does not operate normally. Usually, the cosmic illumination has a duration of a few minutes or hours, leaving an aftermath of a few days. But no matter how brief, it is completely transformative, and it transforms one into another higher being. My usual period through life has been about 10 days following the first intensive few hours, but this 1921 period lasted for 39 days and nights, beginning on May 10th and ending on June 19th. The illumination into cosmic consciousness is an entirely spiritual experience and is the ultimate goal of all mankind, which completes the unfolding of the man idea on earth. All down through man's unfolding, it comes gradually to all people. Every inspiring thought which comes to you is a partial illumination. The geniuses of the world are those who have had the greatest number of spiritual inspirations. Every such inspiration is also a partial illumination, and each illumination is a further unfolding of inner sensory perception and inner hearing. Whenever a great genius creates any masterpiece of art, in any of the 5 fine arts, and you are re-inspired by the creation which has inner ears hear in the eternal silence, he is illumining you with the light given him. That is how man arises from the brute stage to the divine cosmic stage, by gradually adding to his culture. Every one of the great mystics who has been anointed in the light of all-knowing has uplifted countless millions of men who become his followers. The great religions of the world grew out of illuminations of such supreme mystics as Buddha, Muhammad, the unknown mystic who wrote the Bhagavad Gita, which became the Eastern Bible, and Jesus. Of these, Jesus and the unknown writer of the Gita were the only consummate illuminates recorded in history, as they alone scientifically understood the love principle as the basis of creation and the undivided divine light of God as the source of the divided light of God's creation. They alone, of all the mystics, had all-knowing to the extent they so fully comprehended their divinity as sons of God that they could say, "I and my Father are one," and know what it meant. Full illumination is the goal of all mankind. It is the Christ-conscious status which no other mystic of past ages has acquired except possibly one other still more ancient Egyptian, but all men will eventually acquire this status when their journey of life is completed. There have been quite a number of lesser illumined mystics whose teachings and works have exalted mankind in various degrees, such as Lao Tzu, Confucius, Plotinus, Paul, Isaiah, Socrates, Jacob Behmen, Spinoza, Leonardo da Vinci, Bach, Beethoven, Shakespeare, Baha'u'llah, Walt Whitman, and Mary Baker Eddy. These mystics were illumined with the light for the purpose of illumining the paths of unillumined men. These, together with genius masters in all of the arts, have given the world its culture. Without these few Illuminati, the world of man would still be primate. Inspiration is the first stepping stone which leads to genius. Genius is the next of the 3 great pinnacles of mankind, which are inspired, man, genius, and mystic. When one is inspired, either through meditation or through the works of inspired men, he has arisen through the partial illumination from the purely physical to the spiritual status which leads ever upward to the all-knowing, fully illumined sonship with God, which is the Christ status. Inspired men, geniuses, and mystics are the saviors of other men. They are the interpreters of God's language of light and teachers of the love nature of God, who uplift the world of men by re-inspiring them with the light of their illumining, each in the measure of his own awareness of the light of God consciousness or Christ consciousness within him. Treasure, therefore, your inspired moments, which become more and more yours as you increasingly walk and talk and work with God. Each of the supreme mystics of the past brought message of love, unity, and the brotherhood of man to the people of this day. But the human race was too new out of the jungle either to comprehend the principle of love or practice it. The human race has not yet unfolded enough to more than faintly understand it or practice it. Man's attempt to understand it has led to the formation of many religions which have disunited man instead of uniting him. And the misinterpretation of the nature of God as a wrathful God of fear has created a world of fear, sin, evil, selfishness, and greed, which has led to countless killings in war after war. Man becomes what he thinks and believes. He is an evil sinner because he has been made to believe that he is an evil sinner. Until the last 100 years, human comprehension has not reached the possibility of comprehending what this electric age has taught to man. For this reason, God has again sent his message of love to this new electric age of unfolding man, for there are a sufficient number of men who can become the seed of the cosmic age now dawning for re-inspiring other men to their exaltation into cosmic knowing. These few among the many, such as you are, else you would not have been led to it, will spread their knowing of the love nature of God throughout the earth and to man of the comprehension of this electric age, and that alone will save mankind from his own destruction. My personal reaction to this great happening left me wholly mind with but slight awareness of my electric body. During practically all of the time, I felt that my body was not a part of me, but attached to my consciousness by electric flux threads of light. When I had to use it in such acts as writing in words the essence of God's message, it was extremely difficult to bring my body back under control of my consciousness and make it do as I ordered it to do. After many days of such effort, I suddenly wrote as clearly and as legibly as the script of a child, and in a handwriting which I have never before or since used. It was necessary to overcome this difficulty, for the great reason for keeping me in the light for such a long period was to write down the message of the divine Iliad as interpreted from the rhythms of God's thinking in the inspired language of light, for the purpose of making mankind at long last know and comprehend God. Also, it was necessary for me to make hundreds of diagrams for chemical and astronomical charts for the purpose of giving science a new cosmogony in harmony with the laws of nature, to replace the present one which does not conform with natural law. Over 40,000 words were thus written, and hundreds of charts made with God's mind and thinking being mine, with hardly an erasure or correction. You have read the books of beauty, love, desire, healing, and other parts of the divine Iliad. Surely know that I could not alone write such rhythmic and masterly literature, nor can any man at any time produce masterly art except while in the ecstasy of working knowingly with God. During the entire period of severance, I could never attach my body to my mind as a part of myself. It always seemed outside of me, unattached, like an instrument which I could use but was in no way related to my personal being. Lao experienced the same effect during the 3 days of her severance in 1946. When my body felt hunger, it was not I who was hungry. My body automatically picked up food under instinctive control without mental interest in the process whatsoever. The food my body ate was as impersonal to me as the food given to an animal or to another person. My body likewise acted under instinctive control when it felt necessary for air or exercise. It sometimes walked itself in the park where it knew the way, and it would come back unerringly because it was not I who walked, for I was forever in the high heavens of indescribable ecstasy, forever talking with God in his thought language of light. It is impossible ever to convey to anyone whose inner vision has not yet begun to unfold a dynamic understanding of that transition from the sensing of a mind-controlled body to the knowing of mind, which has been severed from the body. I shall do my best to explain it by describing what happened. I cannot relate anything to time, for time ceased to be. All I can say is that there came a time after that blinding flash in which I became aware of knowing all things. Somewhere in the Bible it says something like these words, "Ye shall have an anointing of the Holy One, and ye shall know all things." On the face of it, such a statement seems incredible, but it is not. Our concept of knowledge has been built upon the complexity of multitudinous effect. instead of the utter simplicity of the cause of complex effect. Cause is as simple as the three mirrors in a kaleidoscope, while effect is as complex as the infinite repetition of a few pieces of broken glass reflected within those three mirrors. We can comprehend effect, but we cannot know it. We can know only the cause of effect. Encyclopedic information is not knowledge, but that is our concept of knowledge. In one timeless flash, I knew all things. All that I had ever written since then are but three-dimensional extensions into a universe of time and space. It did take time to think them into form and write them down, but to know all things was timeless. All my chemical and astronomical charts were made before I knew the names of the elements or of stellar formations. Illumination into the light, which means just that, for it is the light of all knowing, or the light of love, which is manifested by thinking God's all-knowing into complexities of patterned form. I instantly and timelessly knew the still undivided divine light of God, which is the fulcrum of life and power. Also, I knew the heartbeat of the divided light wave universe, which manifests love, life, and power in matter. And I also knew that mind and soul and God were one, the one invisible, omnipresent, omniscient, omnipotent creator of all visible things in all this universe of mind, which God is. I also instantly and timelessly knew that the individual cosmic light of the God of love was what God is, and that the sensed electric wave universe of motion, which stimulates love, life, and power, had no reality whatsoever. I knew it for what it was: God's thinking, God's imagining. Pure illusion, simulation, self-voiding forms thrown on the screen of space to manifest changeless ideas by setting it in motion to produce the effect of change. Thus, knowing the universal heartbeat, I knew the electric wave, or universal pulse, to which all moving, creating things were geared. And thus knowing the wave and its octave pulse beat in cyclic rhythms, which spelled their rhythms out for me always as 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 0 of generative life, and 4, 3, 2, 1, 0 of radioactive death. I then knew all cause and comprehended all effect. There was nothing to know but God's one whole idea of creation during the whole construction of this lightwave universe in this entire course of study. The basic principle diagrammed will never be departed from or exceeded, for there is nothing in nature or in your own life or in your own thinking or in any action of yours which can vary one whit from this basic electric pulse beat of creation. Nor is there anything the chemist, physicist, metallurgist, or engineer can exceed beyond this formula or vary it in his work. Likewise, the poet, painter, inventor, musician, or architect is limited to this simplicity beyond which he cannot go and to which he must conform. Likewise, the healthy growth of your body or the conduct of your friend or business relations must conform to this principle of balance, or else suffer the consequences of whatever unbalanced residue remains from lack of conformity with the heartbeats of the universe. As we proceed to unfold this principle by its application to the many departments of life and work, other series of words will be used which have different connotations, and herein lies the seeming complexity which makes everything you do seem difficult. The difficulty of that seeming complexity lies in the popular belief that cause and knowledge are complex, while cause and knowledge are utterly simple. But information concerning effect is so utterly complex that it takes many large volumes of encyclopedias to write it all down, and yet not one thing in those vast volumes can possibly vary in principle from this simple formula of action-reaction sequences of expressed energy, which is the electric heartbeat of our physical universe. The reason why a genius is able to do so many things in a masterly manner is because of his constantly growing knowledge of the universal heartbeat, which multiplies power in him as his inner sensory vision unfolds. This cannot suddenly unfold in you except by cosmic illumination, but you can very greatly accelerate its unfolding if you will open your heart to these lessons and get their essence into your consciousness instead of just photographing them upon your brain. If you just photograph them upon your brain, you can remember and repeat them, but you will not know them until deep thought and much meditation while alone in your chamber. Make them a part of your soul pattern. The more you do that, the more speedily you will extend your inner sensory perception toward cause. Until you do that, you have no knowledge whatsoever, for knowledge is cosmic. It is mental, while the brain is but a recording instrument which senses impressions recorded upon it and cannot know anything. Electrical awareness of effect must not be confused with cosmic awareness of cause. Electrical awareness means only the outer sensations caused by bodies of matter in motion, while cosmic consciousness means an inner awareness of soul, the universal soul of God, which man is to the extent of his awareness of his unity with God. Electrical sensation must not be mistaken for cosmic inspiration, nor for thinking, nor for knowing. Conclusion. There now remains but one never yet explained mystery which all illuminates experience, even those who have but the slightest flash of it. All experiences are accompanied by great seas of color, which the eyes do not see, for the eyes may be closed. These color flashes are the beginnings of the unfolding of inner sensory perception. They are the effects of inner vision, which means the division of the color spectrum in that part of the color range which is invisible to the outer senses but perfectly visible to the inner senses of one who has found the inner kingdom. As the usual 1 to 4 cosmic flashes, which are the sum total of most illuminates, never take them so far within the inner gates to the very zero of the undivided light. These illuminates are not fully aware that they are beginning to see God's creative processes which are fully revealed in his divided spectrum. No one but a consummate illuminate ever attains the center of stillness, and then only by a continuity of cosmic experiences during many years of preparation. As my own flashes began at 7 years of age and continued until I had 43 of them up to 1921, and as 7 of these were long extended ones, the last one continuing for 39 days, I thus attained that center wherein the whole 360 degrees of the invisible spectrum became known to me, as clearly as the very small range of the visible spectrum is known to those who are limited to the range given to the outer senses. During this life period of gradual increase of inner vision, I sensed the increasing color range, which indicated the processes of the construction of matter as a periodic passing through 9 gates, which reached from creation back to its source in the zero of undivided magnetic light, which God is. These gates of light through which I entered were the 9 octaves which constitute the whole color spectrum. 5 1/2 of these are known by the outer senses of man, and have been charted by him in what is known as the Mendeleev table of the elements. During my 1921 prolonged illumination, I charted the whole 9 octaves from 0 to 0. This completed the spectrum cycle given by me to science in 1926, which gave me my Doctor of Science degree in 1941, and also gave atomic energy to the world. Thus it is that I knew God's ways and processes in which his universe of electrically divided light came into being, without the necessity of consulting books or experimenting in laboratories. Also, I was removed from the dangers of deception by the illusions of motion, which the outer senses are unknowingly subjected to. These deceptions have led to such a mass of wrong conclusions by those who have relied upon them, that the present electrical concepts of man are quite the reverse of nature's process. Unfortunately for the progress of science, man is peering into effect to seek the cause of effect. Cyclotrons, microscopes, and telescopes will reveal effect only for cause is not in them. Unfortunately, also for science, its outer sensed conclusions are so utterly convincing that the true concept, as visioned by a consummate illuminate, whom the world knows only once in 1,000 years, is deemed worthless. Instead of realizing the infinitely priceless value of such a visitor to the human race, he's calculatingly suppressed lest the beloved traditions born from sense conclusions be destroyed. They cannot be destroyed, However, for the day will come, even though it may be 1,000 years from now, that the revelations which shall be given to man by Lao and me in this course of study will make a new world based upon its cosmic truths. These revelations will live in you, who will know them, and through you, the world will someday know what you shall know. The Story of My God Awareness by Lao Russell. That rare experience into cosmic consciousness known as illumination means being transformed into God awareness. That is why I use the word in the title to this story. I also use it to indicate to you that God awareness is as much yours when you are ready for it as it is mine and every other great Illuminati who have given the world its present culture. I also use it that way because it was never a happening or transforming event to me as it was to all recorded illuminates of the long ages. A happening must have time and place for that happening. I was never thus transformed from the physical to the spiritual. There was never a time or place for my illumining, for I was born into it, never lost it. God awareness was natural with me from birth and became more and more real as I learned to talk with him knowingly in my early infancy. He had always been more real to me than any human being could ever be. So vivid is my soul recording of the inner ecstasy I knew as a child that just recalling it always gives me the power to meet the human challenge of living in a body world and meeting its many tensions and frustrations with knowledge of how to overcome them in myself and to extend that power to others as I grew older. Illumination gives one that power through awareness of inner vision and inner hearing that gradually becomes absolute. To make that fact clear to the world is one reason why I wrote God will work with you, but not for you. As you can now see by the above, my adjustments into the body world of man was in reverse to the usual adjustment of those who must be transformed into the status which I never lost. For I was fully aware by the age of 3 that other humans did not think and react to life as I did. I had to learn to live in two worlds, my inner world, which I could not speak about without meeting worried looks and doubting, and man's outer world, which I thought very strange and somewhat stupid. My bewilderment as a small child was in trying to adjust myself to the sensed world in which I was compelled to be a part, and to keep from speaking of my world, which I found they could not understand. I was always aware of the fact that I could gain knowledge and power to do things by talking to God about what I wanted to know or do. I avoided books and teachers, as I later found that all inner-visioned geniuses and mystics always do. My husband was a noteworthy example of this power of inner-visioned men, for he discarded books, teachers, and schools at a very early age and became entirely God-taught. Like him, I found that anything I desired to do, I could do. Many years later, when we were working together to interpret my conception of the Christ, which is now in our garden, and the face upon which he was working was not as I had conceived it, he said, "You do it yourself. Your power of expression is equal to mine because you have discovered that whatever you have conceived in your mind, you can give a body to, which will image your conception. The fact that you have never before touched clay does not enter into it. The technique of anything melts into insignificance when knowledge and desire are strong. The circumstances of my family life during my childhood were such that I had much aloneness. This was wonderful, for I was thus enabled to grow up alone with God. My distinct God awareness from early childhood led me to the realization that all children are born with spiritual consciousness, for they alone have the great mind imaginings which are evidenced in their love for imaginative and symbolic stories. I am convinced that children thus born are of the kingdom of heaven at birth, but become transformed into sensed physical beings through the necessity of using their senses for survival of body alone, or for satisfying body tensions, passions, and frustrations, or for the acquisition of possession for the purpose of experiencing pleasurable sensations. When man thus gives all of his time to his body demands and no time to be alone with God and his immortal self in communion, is it any wonder that he himself weans himself away from his divine birthright? When Jesus said, "Ye must become as a little child, for of such is the kingdom of heaven," he meant just that. This explains the difference between my continuous God awareness from birth and the transformation into God awareness of the 30 to 40 other known illuminates who had forgotten or failed to retain their early God awareness. God will not allow this forgetfulness in those whom he is preparing for messengership to the human race. When the appointed day arrives for their severance from body to mind, they are illumined into the light and made to find his purpose for their transformation. This often means the complete withdrawal of the illumined one from the world of sensation for long periods of adjustment and understanding through continued communion with God. History tells of Buddha's withdrawal under the shade of a banyan tree, of Jesus' retirement into the wilderness for 40 days of communion, and my husband's withdrawal for 39 days and nights to write down this communion in the message of the divine Iliad for man and the completion of the Mendeleev table of the elements for science. I would say right here that God's whole creating universe is purposeful in every part. Every man's destiny is based upon the gradual discovery of his self, his purpose, and his destiny. As children grow older and farther away from God and talk more to man as man and less to God, they lose their contact with him as they sail out on the sea of physical experience. A child, however, is actually born with full knowledge of his purpose and destiny, for it is in his very seed and soul. In other words, all of the qualities of the invisible mind universe are in him at birth. But as his body grows and asserts itself more and more strongly in the survival of the fittest body world, he gradually loses his awareness of those spiritual qualities. They are there in him, however. They still center his soul seed until some sudden flash of the cosmic light severs his consciousness from his sensed body. Body experiences wean him away from the spiritual awareness of his cosmic purpose. They also wean him away from awareness of his cosmic identity, for he begins to view God from the viewpoint of body rather than of mind. As his body experiences more and more physical sensations, his senses convince him that his body is his identity. In his outer sensed world of physical activities, all that is cosmically omniscient in him lies dormant within his sleeping consciousness until suddenly some great flash of God awareness awakens the light in him, and he is at least transformed into his mind identity with almost complete forgetfulness of his body identity during the period of his severance. That is what all illuminates mean when they say, like Paul, that they were transformed in a flash into another being and can never again be as they were. That is the overwhelming experience of the few world of Illuminati. But I would not have written this story if it were not for the fact that a second dawn of consciousness is giving birth to thousands upon thousands of people who are beginning to hear that inner voice of God trying to reach their consciousness in lesser illuminations than great mind-severing flashes. But they do not know what it means. All they know is that they are becoming different beings. They feel an ecstasy of inspiration, which they have never before known, and it sets them to seeking for its inspiring source and not knowing where to seek. Very often, from not knowing where to seek, they are led away from the light they seek into the dark of imagining that voices of the dead are trying to speak to the world through them. Many of those are so bewildered that their mental exaltation develops in them what is known as the Messiah complex. These thousands are the ones we seek in order to tell from what is happening to them, and to have them so fully comprehend it, they will know how to control it. For the future of the human race lies in their hands. These thousands are the seeds of the new cosmic age, which will arise from the second dawn of consciousness. The first being that one which transformed man from his jungle animal stage into the barbaric human stage of his early beginnings. It is vitally important that these saviors of the race fully comprehend that their inner sensory powers are beginning to unfold, and thus save themselves from useless seeking from cult to cult and one belief after another until they are lost in its confusion and bound by the physical demands made upon them by the many systems of belief which they are compelled to support. We must tell them that there is only God and themselves in the universe, and there's nothing between that oneness. We must explain God's ways and processes so thoroughly they can see that their own ways and processes are like unto God's. This we shall do in this course until they gradually see that God's identity is like unto their own. And with that supreme discovery, we will come to the realization of the oneness of all intelligence in the light of the one mind which controls all man. Man, the unknown, must become the known. It is useless to say, "Man, know thyself," in the face of such bewildering mysteries which accompany the slow unfolding of intelligence in the human race. Only one who has been cosmically illumined can make another comprehend the awakening which is taking place in these thousands. This awakening is rendered more difficult by condemnation and suppression by parents and friends who do not understand it. Even the genius child is condemned by his own parents and teachers as being subnormal because they do not recognize the symptoms of mind illumining when they are confronted by them. That is why we must teach the science of man until the whole human race not only understands the relationships of body to mind, but also understands that the human race is not in its highly unfolded state at this time. On the contrary, it is only in its very early beginnings. It is, in fact, still in the barbaric, marauding, killing stage of its emergence into the human state, which was only a very few thousand years ago. This is a tragic period for the unfolding of man, unless he very soon becomes aware of his sleeping divine inheritance through the comprehension of the thousands of messengers whom God is now borning into the world. He will face another dark age of long centuries. These few can save the many, but only if these few comprehend that God is trying to reach their consciousness, to unify their identity with His. That is the one thing I have known all my life from the age of 3, and have been preparing for all my life to be worthy of giving it to the world of man. My whole life since then has been a preparation for that task. In my early years, I had thought of that task as mine alone and was eager to grow up in order that I could fulfill it. Later, however, my inner vision told me that another, a man from a far country, was being prepared for the same task, and that we too would unite as one in fulfilling it. And now I shall tell you that part of the story so you will better comprehend God's control over the destiny of all creating idea forms, which we call bodies, by sending messengers who know to give knowledge to those who are beginning to know. For your better understanding of God's ways of creating bodies to become actors in His play of creation, it is well to pause here to explain very briefly one of God's ways which is as yet unknown to man. Later in this course, this unknown principle will be more fully explained. But it is necessary to sketch it briefly here in order that you may fully comprehend why and how God prepares His messengers for specific work, and why it takes time to prepare them. Give thought, therefore, to the following and learn to apply it for everything you do in life, no matter how great or small. 1. Man, the creator, is outside of everything he creates. He thus finds himself in an objective universe of many things, of which he is just one of those many things. God, the creator, is within each of the countless electrons which make up each atom of it. In Him, the objective universe disappears into just one omnipresent thing, of which He is that one thing. God cannot be omnipresent by being outside of any part of His universe. All of His desire is as much centered upon the smallest thing in His creation as upon the largest thing in it. To Him, the smallest particle is as important as the largest galaxy. He sits upon its centering throne and controls it. He guides every animal form by instinctive control and every mineral form by its electrical prototype, which we call polarity. Thus it is that He centers all things to guide and teach them from within them. And He extends 2 balancing poles of gravity from His centering throne to the 2 halves of their electric bodies to make them aware of their subjection to His one law of balance. Now apply this knowledge to yourself, and you will have a better and more vivid idea of how close you have always been to God without being aware of it. Also imagine God sitting upon that throne of your soul, patiently waiting your slow unfolding as part of His creation to the time when you will hear His voice. 2. Knowledge is timeless, but its expression in the creation of bodies in a 3-dimensional universe takes time. Time itself has no existence in mind. It appears to exist in mind thinking because thoughts are divided into sequential events. You must understand this, for when you know God sufficiently to talk with Him, you will find that He gives you a great amount of knowledge in a timeless flash. But it takes you a long time to unfold that knowledge into a 3-dimensional projection in time and space. You lose some of it as you transform the spiritual conception into body form, but the God light is always within you and will always give you as much at a time as you can bear. 3. The most fundamental principle of creation, which is as yet unknown and unsuspected to science, is the fact that everybody and every effect which God creates in nature is brought to its maturity by 4 consecutive rhythmic efforts, not just one. This is as true as the slightest sound, as it is a man or a sun. It requires 4 different bodies of entirely different qualities to make one body, which you can now say is a man, or the sound of a harp string, a sun, or the element carbon. More amazing still is the fact that each of these 4 bodies is an opposed sex pair. Full knowledge of this interrelative principle will give tremendous impetus to the sciences of biology, chemistry, metallurgy, and medical practice. For no idea or effect can ever be completed to maturity without having made these 4 transitions in tonal setups of power and transmutations of attributes and qualities. More important still is the fact that no chemical, animal, or sound body can repeat itself or escape the unbalanced tensions upon which all body diseases are found, or reproduce its kind without making these 4 efforts. More amazing still is the fact that the end result of the completed body is dependent upon the balance or unbalance of the 4 successive foundations laid for it by these step-up transformers of nature, which all electric waves are. Later you will comprehend more of this biggest but unknown principle of physics, as well as of your own destiny, when you become more familiar with God's octave wave units of light, with which He builds His universe and you. You will also be interested in how He does it, how He controls and records what is being done. The special necessity of its brief mention here is because you must understand why it takes no time at all for God to give you all the knowledge you need to become His messenger. But the action you must give to interpret that knowledge into words, experiences, and other demonstrations of it takes long preparation. It must pass through those 4 pairs of efforts, and you yourself must be the source of those efforts, as well as its result. This is why you eventually become exactly what you think. In other words, every creating thing must unfold from its invisible source into the time and space world in 4 pairs of tonal efforts before it can mature into the idea intended. This is nature's life principle. It must then refold by the reverse 4-tonal process. This is nature's death principle. This is as true of a human destiny as it is of a tree or solar system. I hope you all now have a greater comprehension of the time element which was necessary for me to unfold from my mind the knowledge you must refold into yours, and why my husband and I must take many years in giving to the human race that which took so many years of unfolding in us. The above interlude will give you more understanding of my meaning when I say God gave me a purpose to fulfill, as He also gives everyone a purpose to fulfill. The only difference being that I was enabled to unfold my purpose knowingly, never losing it, instead of losing it by body demands while manifesting life in the body as other people do. Someday the full story of the unfolding of my inner sensory perception will be told in greater detail, but the result of that inner knowledge is more important to be given at this time. I vaguely felt I had come into the world at a crucial time in its history. Its downfall toward another dark age had already begun. Cultural standards were lowering, and just ahead were the agonizing wars where millions would kill other millions as a retribution for the international marauding and killings of the empire builders, which filled the hearts of men with the enmity of hate and fear. As time progressed, I became more and more distinctly aware that I was being prepared to make man know God. I became aware also that I was but part of that message to the human race. During many of my early days of aloneness, I found myself talking to the whole world of men who seemed to be right there in my room or in the woodlands where I wandered. Always the theme of my discourses to them could be summed up in these words: man is not bad. Man is good in his heart. There is no evil in man. Man cannot be bad, for God is always with him. I must make him know God. He will then know that he is good. As I grew older, I felt myself more and more to be a part of that other who was also being prepared for the same purpose and my inner vision one day told me that he was in America. Thereafter, I often felt myself in communion with him, becoming aware of the burden of his long preparation and knowing that he shared mine. In 1921, I felt the overwhelming experience he was undergoing and made a desperate attempt to go to America, but a young girl in an English family such as mine and the conditions of my environment made that attempt an impossible one. It was not to be, however, and also it should not be. He had 25 more years of difficult preparations to make, and he was commanded to await those 25 years before beginning his activities while the world made more ready for his message by deeper suffering. I was not ready. I was still very young. The demands of my preparation were to lead me to many far countries to look into the hearts of men and know that man was good, for God was in him and he could not be bad. For months, I lived at the foot of the pyramids in great aloneness and looked into the hearts of desert tribes and world travelers alike. I found naught but good. When I looked into the soul, but a great vision came to me on that desert waste, the vision that man's belief in evil was confined to his senses only, and the senses of man are not man. There came unto me the full import of the one thing which could alone save man, and that one thing was the discovery by man of the light of his inner self and his identity with God. Many years later, I discovered that my husband had been commanded to make man know God as a scientific fact, and to know God's ways and processes as the means of saving civilization from the rapid decadence that it has been experiencing since the year 1900. This means that the upward turn in the spiritual unfolding of man is dependent solely upon his transformation from being an outer sensing body to becoming an inner knowing mind. This also means that there can never be a spiritual rebirth of man until he has first become transformed by the discovery of his inner self-unity with God. That is the great import of the message which God was preparing me for in my way and my husband in his way. It was one message, however, of which, let us say, I was to be the mother and my husband the father. It is a strange fact that every illumined messenger whom God has sent into the world with full preparation by him to save mankind from belief in his own man-made evil has given that very same message to the world of his day. Every one of them, without a single exception, has told man that he never can know love or the peace which passeth all understanding until he has first sought and found the light of the kingdom of heaven, which lieth within man, to quote Jesus, or the Brahmic bliss, to quote Buddha. The messengers differed, but the message was always the same and always will be until man heeds it. That message of unity which says, my Father and I are one, and all men are one brotherhood, has always been the same and unchanged since Krishna spoke these words in ancient India to the days of the modern messengers, Baha'u'llah and Mary Baker Eddy. The only element of change which makes successive receptions of the message necessary is the comprehension of the people of successive ages. No matter how true the words may be, they are ineffective when they convey no meaning or convey false interpretations of meaning. Our present civilization has a greater power of comprehension than past civilizations had. The boy of 10 who comprehends radar can comprehend omnipresence. This electric age has prepared man with power to comprehend the message now, for it can be expressed in scientific terms instead of abstract ones. Likewise, God can now be scientifically verified. That is why God prepared my husband during a whole lifetime to give man a scientific comprehension of God, and likewise prepared me to give him that comprehension as a living philosophy. And thus, it was that the years of preparation passed in great aloneness for both of us. I found myself in far countries, still within the soul of man, and Doctor gave the world its first knowledge of the existence of trans-uranium elements and the hydrogen isotopes. In the meantime, civilization continued its downhill plunge toward the chaos which it had made for itself by its centuries of sowing the seeds of hatred and fear. Man killed by millions instead of the hundreds of yesterday. Brutality and slavery, heretofore unknown in world history, became the order of the day. Treason became commonplace, and the cultural arts became as decadent as the last fall of man, when the culture that was Greece was thrown into the sea. The day of our united action was at last at hand. however, and deep within I knew that the time was near when the destiny for which I had been born was to be fulfilled. I had come to America, the country that had called me from my birth, and finally settled in Boston, where my inner vision led me for my last years of preparation and communion in great aloneness. My inner sensory perception was so intense in those last 3 years of my preparation that I knew every moment must be used to write down the essence of my inner knowing. Many of these writings, which had been started at the foot of the pyramids, you will read all through our home study course and in my book, God Will Work With You, But Not For You. A few months before the greatest severance of the mind and body I was yet to know, I cried out to God. In my human impatience, God, make known to me my work and guide me to the one with whom I am to share the message. In the deep stillness that followed my plea, God's answer came, rest a while on the hill of tranquility. That brief instruction brought the glorious peace to my heart which passeth all understanding, and patiently I awaited my appointed day. 3 months later, the full glory of becoming all mind was mine, and I knew my final days of preparation were over. The life experience is so necessary to prepare one for God's work had been completed, and I knew that from that time forward, every moment of my life would be lived for Him alone. For 3 whole days and nights from January 14th through January 17th, 1946, during my severance from body sensing, I knew myself one with the rhythmic 1, 2, 3, 4 pulsing of God's light wave universe. I knew the untold power of the whole universe that centered me, for which there are no words, although the instructions were clear in that wordlessness of knowing. Those of you who have known but a flash of illumination will comprehend what I mean by wordless knowing. In that oneness with all creation, and yet apart from it, I knew I must forever hold within my consciousness all that was revealed to me in the 3 months that were to pass before the physical meeting with that other half of me. I wrote down many pages of that inner cosmic knowledge that God revealed to me in those 3 ecstatic days and nights, in those timeless hours. I knew we must not fail in the giving again of God's message of love. For if we failed this time, it would be another 3,000 years before man would be ready to hear again a cosmic message from our Father. I knew the assurance of personal power to undertake my great task, and that very soon the one with whom I was to share the work of giving it would be by my side. God had taken me unto a high mountaintop for my illumining, and it was then I visioned the very mountaintop we now live upon in Virginia. It was to be almost 3 years later that I was actually to see this mount of my vision, but it was exactly as I had visioned it. Although I had never expected to see it in form, for such a place had not been part of my human planning. I returned to body awareness with these wordless words indented in my consciousness. You shall know space, but never emptiness. Those words held a world of meaning for me then, as they have done ever since. I was many times to recall them in the momentous years ahead and draw great strength from the message of assurance they contained. When in the space of waiting for specific instructions from God, I was to know His presence always and never the emptiness of unawareness. In March of 1946, 3 months after my complete illumining, that one whom I had telepathically known so long came into my life. Our meeting was, as thought, 2 rivers flowing into the same valley becoming one. The power and the glory of that unity of purpose was ours. Now we but live and work solely to fulfill our sacred trust to illumine mankind with knowledge of light and love, which alone can give to the world the happiness and peace which all men forever seek. At the end of this, they go over the effects of illumination. The first and most conspicuous effect of illumination, they begin. Into full cosmic consciousness is the utter absence of evil, sin, or shame. There's no thought of such an unbalanced condition while in the one ecstatic condition of perfect balance, which the light of love is. When we say there can be no thought of such a thing, we can best transfer that thought to you by asking if you feel the slightest thought of falling while you stand in balance. You obviously cannot, for your senses will not vibrate to tell you that you're falling until you actually begin to fall. Likewise, when you are perfectly comfortable, your senses will not tell you that you are uncomfortable until you begin to be. You will then put on a coat, if you're cold, to bring your body back into the balanced condition of comfort. Illumination into the light of cosmic consciousness transports you immediately into the light of all-knowing of cause, which balances and controls all effect. The cosmic spiritual light is balance. That which man calls evil or sin or shame or any of its attributes such as anger, jealousy, worry, fear, cruelty, lust, or the greeds which lead to murders and wars are unbalanced conditions created by man who has not yet known God and because of it has not learned the law of love, which demands equal interchange between all opposite conditions in all human relations. Man himself has manufactured evil, sin, and shame because of the impossibility of keeping himself in balance. His material greeds impelled him to take what he wanted without giving in order to be regiven. There is no such thing in nature as evil, sin, or shame. Nature is never unbalanced. The heavens give of light and rains to earth, and earth regives equally of her forest and crops and vapors which replenish the heavens. Nature does not cheat, lie, or steal. It only gives and regives. When man learns that lesson from nature, his civilization will be as eternal as nature is eternal. The love cycle. The very essence of the love principle is the action of giving and its reaction of regiving. This action and reaction is expressed in every electric wave, every physical event of every living thing, and in the creation of every particle of matter. Every visible moving form is given to creation by the invisible universe of stillness and must be regiven to that invisible stillness. The seed gives all of itself to unfold into a tree. The tree regives all of itself to refold into its seed. The earth gives you your body, but you must regive it to the earth. Space gives you your breath, but you must regive all of it to space. Everything on earth and in the heavens which appears as a material moving body must disappear into the invisible stillness from which it came in order to reappear as another visible body. That forever repeated action and reaction of giving visible substance to idea and regiving that substance back to the invisible idea is all that constitutes the process of creation. There is no other process in all creation. The universe is founded upon love. Love is its fulcrum. The love cycle of giving and regiving is the expression of love in the visible universe of motion. If both expressions of the love cycle are balanced with each other, the result is what we call good. If they are not balanced, all of those things which we call ills, diseases, frustrations, misfortunes, failures, hatreds, and enmities arise from that unbalance. The secret of life is to learn how to balance one's transactions so that the givings and regivings are equal in balance with each other. In the still universe of love unexpressed lies all cause. In the moving universe of action and reaction lies all effect. Effect is always divided into four pairs, which must balance with their one cause. The very living of life is a continuous lesson in learning to balance effect with cause. As every effect which you do set in motion is a pendulum which will return to bless or smite you in the measure of your knowledge or lack of it, it is imperative to your welfare that you open your heart and soul to what is herein written, and not sift it through any traditions or cults or teachings which have been so deeply impressed upon your brain by sensations or emotions that all you have accumulated in a lifetime are but abstractions which you forever repeat but cannot possibly explain. That which your brain alone has recorded, you do not know and therefore cannot explain to others or even to yourself. That which you know in your heart and is recorded within your soul remains with you throughout the ages and is reincarnated within the seed of you for adding to it life after life as you journey through the ages of your final goal of complete unity with the light of God, which you are gradually knowing a little at a time as you walk and talk with God to know Him in you more and more day by day. There is much in the message we are delivering which will probably not be published for years, and much which is personal in the nature of instructions as to time and method of delivery. We will now give you some of these unpublished pages so that you may know how explicit is every detail of the unfolding of any of God's plans when you work together with God as one. We hereby quote, "Thou art the light. Content thou never shall be with a reflection of the light in man's outer vision. Content thou never shall be in man's universe of dimension. Content thou shalt be only when in communion with me upon thy mountain top. Thou art ecstatic man. Thou art the herald of ecstatic man to come. Thou art to unloose the bindings with which man has bound himself. The ecstasy of my light is thine. The agony of man's revilings shall be thine in generous portion. Heed them not, my son. The capacity for ecstasy is measured only by the capacity for suffering. Therefore rejoice thou in thy suffering. Gather thou all the nations of the earth, and sing to them my words written for ecstatic man in light upon the pulsing heart. Go thou in all humility, and heed not thy crucifixion in the hearts of 10 times 10 million men. He who comes to man bearing inspired knowledge does man crucify. Crucifixion awaits all inspired messengers of the light. Truth lies beyond the crucifixion. To dare down the ideals of man and open the doors which lead to eternal life in the knowledge of the light shall be thy father, mother, work to do. Teach thou those laws by which my universe is bound. Such laws are within the comprehension of man, and none are beyond it. Avoid thou therefore such wordings as psychic things and powers and occult things and powers, which mislead men and tempt him toward his early imaginings, and answer thou all questions dynamically. All man's questions are answered in light. Thou art light. Thou canst answer them. Confine thy teachings to thy written words, translated from thy father mother's rhythmic word in thy light. Preach not, nor teach beyond thou hast written down, for thou art man and full of man's failings. Answer no man that which has not yet been written down by thee, even though thou knowest the answer in the universal language of light. Man's words are treacherous things of many meanings. Therefore meditate when queried beyond thy translated words until thou art alone in light. Then answer by thy well-considered written word. Thy strength shall be in writing down thy words and exemplifying them in charts. Preach thou and teach thou thy books. Send them to the four winds, to all peoples and all nations. Have a care that any spoken words of thine shall not be beyond what thou hast written down, nor divulge nor discuss with any man. My yet untranslated words, this will be thy great temptation. Be strong, therefore, in this wise, lest thou yield to it. Thy strength through thy written words shall be as a mighty rock, which will withstand the batterings of the whole world of men, and thou canst teach and preach within them. But beyond them, thy ill-considered translations will be as a heap of sand, to wear away by the erosion of soft-blown winds. Hear thou these words, my son of light, and heed them. It has been commanded to me to turn man's eyes away from his jungle, to tell him to look upon the face of the Lord and know God's ecstasy in him. These are the words of the Lord. Hear thou them through me. The world of men is decadent. Go thou and resurrect it in my name. The beauty of my balanced thinking has man buried in his dark tombs and set ugliness in the images of man's earth thinking as idols for his worshipping. Man might is he placing before omnipotence in me. Love is he seeking to crucify to deify brutality. Barbarity of his own inviting is even now crossing his horizon to crush him who would exalt it. The seeds of hate is he sowing for the babble of many tongues to multiply. I am a patient God. All men will come to me in due time, but the agony of awaiting that day shall be theirs alone. And that day shall not come until man himself shall cleanse himself from his own unbalanced thinking. Prepare thou therefore my messenger to the cosmic age of ecstatic man, which is now in the deep dark before its dawning, and be thou ready for thine appointed day when man's own chastening shall awaken him in me. 7 years hast thou to prepare for thy first beginning to manifest thy messengership to man. Guard well thy knowing, and herald not thy messengership for these 7 years of thy preparing. Then shall all the world begin to reap the harvest of self-inflicted suffering sown by his own hands in the seed of his unbalanced thinking. And the period of man's self-cleansing shall be another 3 sevens of years added to the sevens of thy novitate years. And then thine appointed day shall be in the 18th year of those 3 sevens, and be thou ready for that day, for thou shalt know no rest in worthily preparing to fulfill thine appointed task. Before that day of man's rebirth in me, his self-made way of earth will be deep strewn with the ashes of his earth-planned tower of self, might denying me and him. Untold suffering shall await him on the blood-drenched road which leads toward the jungle of his own seeking. Anguish will be his lot, and there will be weeping in every home. And many who see such agony in man will say to thee that a God of love cannot be, if man be a son of God, and God the loving Father, Mother of all men. But I say to thee, all men are one. The thinking of one is the thinking of all, and so shall the world harvest be that which was sown in the seed of world thinking. Man's world is the sum total of man's thinking. It is what all the world thinking makes it. If love be in the world, hate cannot also be. In the early days of this cycle, my messenger of that day said, love thy brother as thyself. But man has not yet fully comprehended its meaning. I now say more, for man is not now so new, and can well comprehend my meaning after the coming carnage by man shall have spent its furies, as the calm of earth's storms always follow these storms. These words I now say for newly comprehending men of this new cycle. Love ye one another, all men, for ye are one in me. Whatsoever you do to one in me, ye do to all, for all are one in me. Love thy brother as thyself, serve thy brother before thyself. Lift high thy brother, lift him to high pinnacles, for thy brother is thyself. For of a verity I say, love of self or a nation of selves turns neighbor against neighbor, and nation against nation. Self-love breeds hate, and sows its seed in all the winds to blow wherever it will. Wherefore say I, love of neighbor by neighbor, and nation by nation, unites all men as one. Serve first thy brother. Hurt first thyself rather than thy neighbor. Gain not from him unbalance. By thy giving protect thou the weak with thy strength. For if thou use thy strength against him, his weakness will prevail against thee, and thy strength will avail thee not. Such is my decree, which thou well knowest in the inviolate workings of my law, which holds balance in all creating things. See thou that man well knoweth this principle as the foundation of his new day. Conclusion. We have herein given you parts of the unpublished sections of the message which specifically command in quite some detail the very manner and method of its delivery, as well as its time for delivery. We have given you these instructions for the express purpose of bringing deeply home to you the most important, even though hardly believable, fact of your life. This fact is that if you know God in you, not just abstractly believing it with some slight reservations, and work knowingly with God, your life will be the highest of the high, forever knowing the peace which passeth all understanding. And your achievements will be mighty, for the divine you will be in them. The knowledge of your oneness with God is not possible of instant acceptance by any human in its fullness, as you would instantly accept the knowledge that 2 and 2 are 4. Such illumination is too wonderful for quick unfolding in man, for every cell in man's body cries out the selfhood of the body, and every sensation of man tells him of reality as being in the senses. Outer sensory objective awareness in him is so strong that the transition to intersensory creative thinking awaits long ages of man's slow unfolding. You are able to see and feel that which you have long believed to be you, and you have built up a sense of ego or individuality around and within your body, which has forcibly separated you from all other men, for they are individuals also, human bodies of persons in countless numbers, all separate and apart from each other. It is not a quick process to forget body and separability of bodies just by being told about it, even though you believe it. Your body is the high hurdle which you must surmount in order to know your divinity. These stories of our illumination will help you to realize that you can put aside your body at will, to a greater or lesser extent, and know your divinity to the extent in which you can put your body aside. In meditation, you learn increasingly to forget your body and increasingly become God conscious. Therefore, we say walk and talk with God constantly from moment to moment. Let meditation become a fixed habit and state of mind. Let it get deep down into your consciousness that God is with you at all times, awaiting to work with you. When you realize that every cell of unfolding and refolding matter is centered by God light and controlled in its every second, and that every insect, bird, and beast is instinctively controlled and watched over just as you are, whether you know it or not, how much greater is that power of love, which is watching over you when you know it and work with it. There is no detail of your life or work that you cannot take under instant advisement with God. Many thousands of times each of us have asked Him in our hearts, wordlessly, to guide our hand with His, to give balance to sculpture, painting, writing, teaching, or other work when it seemed lacking, and always the next brush stroke would be made by God's hand and balance restored. The time has come when cosmic man should perpetually acknowledge God as companion and co-worker and cease to think of Him as the Almighty God afar off, to whom he can pray when he needs Him and at all other times get along by himself. When you are in a quandary, you are often prompted to seek some friend for advice. Or if some friend comes in, you're apt to ask his advice. That desire is prompted by your feeling of need for help, but never ask of anyone before asking God. Make it the most natural thing you do to ask God about it. This will always do if God is ever present with you and you feel His presence as He works with you. Let us earnestly counsel you against asking or receiving advice from anyone. No one can advise you unless he becomes a part of you. Your problem must be his problem, and your desire for its solution must be his desire. No one can know all of your problem, nor can you tell it to anyone fully except to God. For many people are there on earth who can be one with you through love. If you know such a one, you can then merge your unity, and God will be in your midst. Such love as that between perfectly mated men and women multiplies their power, for when husband and wife both belong to God, working knowingly with Him, each one is then knowing together, thinking together, and working together with God as one. This principle can be well illustrated by group thinking, such as a meeting of directors in a business or in the Senate or in Congress. Such groups should be as one man, for they all have the same interest in problems. The problem of one is the problem of all. How useless would be the advice of anyone brought into such a meeting who did not take the interests of all into his heart. Try to develop the intense realization that if there is but the one universal mind of God, then you are that mind. And your thinking is God's thinking. Meditation will do that, and the more you meditate with God by taking all of your desires and problems to Him, the more you will develop that oneness. Every meditation is a partial illumination, for you cannot possibly open your mind to God without God immediately responding. And above all things, do not desire the full illumination until and unless it comes to you. It will come when you are ready for it and not before. Rejoice in every partial illumination which you always recognize by the ecstatic or even joyous feeling which inspiration always engenders. And this concludes on Our Awakening by Walter and Lao Russell. I just think this is beautiful, and obviously Walter Russell and Lao Russell have a very unique way of writing. At times it can seem quite complicated. These sentences are huge. Many times I'm reading a full paragraph with no period until the end. So there's a lot of really long sentences. But the primary thing to take from this is that you are always connected with God, that you always create with God, that God's all around you. Here we have a story of their own illumination. I'm wondering if anybody has had something similar. I have had something similar, but for a very short period of time. He's talking about having an illuminating event that occurs. So much so that the way that your brain receives the information is separated so that you get a flash, and that you're sensing or getting information on a different level is what it appears what he's saying. And that he would carry this out through days, months, and was in constant contact with God during these periods of time. I have read other books that talk about this illumination, that refer to this illumination as a specific event. In my opinion, this is the same thing that Dr. Frank B. Robinson is talking about, where he recommends you meditate until you have this event happen. It's the same thing that Neville Goddard is talking about with many aspects of the promise. We've all had these events, but in particular, have you had this sort of illuminating event? I would love to hear about it. In any case, we'll definitely return to Walter and Lao Russell, but this quantum entangles me to their illumination, which I find super powerful and very interesting, as I love all of Walter and Lao Russell's work. You can find all episodes of The Reality Revolution at therealityrevolution.com. And welcome to The Reality Revolution.